All right, welcome to the August Richmond Amateur Radio Club meeting. I'm Rick, KA4OHM. I don't know whether we want to, do we need to zoom, rotate the camera around, try to introduce folks, or not worry about that at this point? We don't have to worry about that. We do have a visitor tonight. That's David Hayworth, W1DRH, who David has been to meetings in the past, and he's the fellow back there with the big antenna mast. So welcome, David. Let us know what you're interested in, what we can do for you here in the club. So let's go ahead and start the business meeting. I'm hoping that everyone has reviewed the brief minutes from the June meeting or July meeting. And does anyone either here or on the Zoom have any questions about the meeting? I mean, about the minutes?
Stand here so they can see you.
Okay. I thought that camera was on me.
There you go.
Now you get to see me. Anyway, does anyone have any questions about the minutes of the last meeting? I guess the people on Zoom, you can stick up a finger, whatever you do to indicate that you have a question. I don't see anything. So I would like a motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting.
Motion to approve N4WLC.
Okay, second. Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Indicate by gesture. Okay, good. So the minutes are approved. Let's have Ken Leidner give us the treasurer's report. Also, I want to mention that Ken Leidner has arranged for Marshall Irvine to review our books again, like he did last year. That's a good service that Marshall provides. Let me take it over, Ken.
Okay, just let me,
You want to push buttons, huh?
I want to push this to get rid of this off the screen.
What are you trying to do?
There, just get rid of that.
Well, don't turn that camera.
Okay, treasurer's report. We had no income, but we started the month with $21,237.90 with no income. We had some expenses. These are somewhat reoccurring. We had the email account that we have the club with is $29.99 a year. Our PO box, $226 for the year. And we had to pay the Hartford Insurance Company their premium. So $433 went out. So $688.99 went out. Leaves us with $20,548.91. We also have one new member. Ron White does not have a call sign. So can I have a motion to accept the new member? Second?
I'll second KO4RNT.
All righty. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Congratulations, Ron White. You're now a member. Back to our president.
Thank you, Ken. If you can get out of there without tripping. All right. Is there any old business that anyone wants to revisit? Any new business anyone wants to bring? Go ahead, Bruce. Yeah, you sure can. You get extra points for not tripping.
Oh, I'm told that with all the wires on the floor, I get extra points for not tripping. Anyway, the classes are set up for next this coming fall. So the tech class starts early in September. It goes for 10 weeks. The extra class starts on the 3rd of October, goes for 6 weeks. The general class starts on the 5th of October and goes for 5 weeks. You'll find all of that on the website, along with the prices, the times, all that sort of thing. We also have 2 of our seminars going to be taught. Robert Orndorff's going to teach the antenna modeling, and I'm going to teach the reusing of the remote station. And Wynn's going to hold off on doing the D-Star until they get the new upgrade on the repeater. Anyway, we're set up, ready to go. I've sent notices out to the other clubs where I could find email addresses, so we'll see what we come up with. The other thing is a little different this year is we've set limits on how many students will sign up. We've actually got enough in some cases that the classroom can't handle it. So on the website, we said maximum number of students. So if there's any questions, that's it for me.
Thank you, Bruce. I'm going to watch your feet there for you. Okay, a few technical things. We do have new repeaters, and with the summertime and people traveling, we haven't been able to get them in there, but hopefully in the near future, we'll install the new repeater modules there at the lottery building. Also, and part of that noise you may hear in the background, the church is getting the roof put on. So once that's done, we're going to put up our antennas, and once that's done, we can get our remote station back on the air. So that's good. Elections are coming up in October, and I have been advised that all currently elected officials have agreed to remain in office. And John DeMayo has agreed, because he would still be the past president, to remain on the board. I have reappointed Steve Bowles to the board, and the other elected board members also will be on the board again. But if there's someone out there who wants the income and prestige that I have right now and want to run for this job, or any of the other wonderful jobs, feel free. But rest assured that we do have a slate of candidates, so everything will be filled if you can't handle that much money or prestige. Let's see. Some messages that I frequently get are about distribution of the estates of Silent Keys. And I got one the other day from Doug Burton, who is the son of Aubrey Burton, WA4TNT, who I am given to understand was a longtime member of this club. Aubrey passed a year ago. And he collected stuff over the years. He's got some stuff that looks like about 1/10 of John's radio museum. And Doug wanted to come tonight and talk about it, but he didn't have an inventory, but he's going to make an inventory. And he took some pictures, which I sent to John, but it's a lot of old stuff, and it's always a dilemma what to do with it because we don't really have the space to store anything. Doug's intention was not to give the club the equipment and then for us to sell it and then use the proceeds to support the club. But, a lot of that stuff is boat anchors and a limited market for it. But so I really don't know how to respond to those queries. I know in the past, Bruce has said, well, we'll take it. And if we can't sell it, then we'll dispose of it. But we could put it in this closet, but it wouldn't be too long before that all got filled up. I got another email from David WD30. Is he a club member? I know he comes to the board meetings, but another person, Chuck Smith, W4SVR, was he in the club? So someone called Marshall, WA4OFW, is helping Chuck's widow dispose of equipment. And there's a link that David gave me. It's a huge list of stuff. Some relatively new stuff like a IC 7100 that he's selling, and then a bunch of stuff he's giving away, but it looks like dozens of items. So again, I don't know whether that's something, I don't think we should put the whole list necessarily on the club website or in the newsletter. Should we put the link? And so look who's here. Come on down. So I'm seeking guidance from the membership, those that have dealt with this in the past. What's the best way to deal with this? Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, we've talked about this before. Meetings in the past.
Can't hear him.
We kind of-
Hold on, Tom. You're gonna have to come up here. Sorry about that.
Okay, we've had some conversation about this before on board meetings. And I think we came to some policy decisions. And I think this is something the board ought to discuss and present it to the club as a policy. Because we're going to continuously have this problem for all of us. And I think there might be something, if we look at the minutes of the past meetings.
Well, I'm all in favor of maintaining a pre-existing policy. We got, as a president of the club, I got an email from someone out in the valley. So I certainly don't think we should be helping, but a former club member, I don't know whether that's a special case. we should help a former club member and their widow, but, so I really don't know. So should I tell these people we can't do it or? Now, I know I had John look at the picture and he saw a few items that. We have no place. Okay. All right. Well, I understand, but I'll try to explain that. Now, what about I'm not sure that the guy that David is representing is asking us to store anything. He's asking us to post a link. Should we do that? Do that. So we can post a link to the account of the W4 SVR. Then I got, yeah. Then I think John DeMayo got an email from someone called Alan K9MBQ regarding a guy called Matt KC1XX who has a tower and antenna installation company. And Alan is bringing this fellow to town in September. And so if anyone was thinking about putting up a tower and needed some help, I can give you the contact information. I think Dave has already made use of it. So if anyone is interested in that, they can approach me after the meeting. All right, let's see. Anybody else have any formal announcements? Go ahead, Ken. I guess you have to come up here. You have to come up here then. It's part of your prep regimen. I'm supervising, yeah. Come on, you can make it. You can make it. Watch the wires, old fellow. There we go.
I'd like everyone to know that the Radio Builders Group is going to meet this next Tuesday. We haven't had a meeting for a while, so I'd like to get going. We've been talking about a project, a group project, for that people, all of us might be interested in. It's hard to do because so many of us, we've built radios, we've built all kinds of things. We built test equipment. And so it's difficult to find something. I did today come across a thing from Nuts and Bolts magazine that has a nice little article about building a power meter. And it looks like it's going to be fairly inexpensive. No surface mount stuff, really easy to put together. And so anyway, so we'll talk about that. There's also other suggestions on building and designing some filters, which we also might want to do. The thing is, we haven't had a meeting for so long that we need to get together and actually discuss ideas of stuff that we can do. We meet at my house in my garage. I'll send out tomorrow an email to all the people on the Builders Group list with the information and everything. If you have not been to one of our meetings before and want to get on that list, please send me an email. My email address is K4ZUT and then dot period or whatever you call that decimal point, HAM, K4ZUT.ham. That's at gmail.com. And then I'll get you on the list, and tomorrow I'll send out an email to the entire group. Any questions about our group? And like I said, we're very informal. We usually have about a half a dozen or more people. And like I say, we meet in my garage. And this Tuesday works out good because my wife has given me permission. So, well, we have to move her car out, So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ken. As those of you on Zoom and others have noticed, we've struggled for about 2 years to try to get the Zoom thing going. And I think tonight we've gotten pretty good at where you have foregone chasing people around with a camera and using a wireless microphone. So we're going to stand here and we'll just get people to come up and talk. But John DeMayo built a custom cart that has AC outlets and audio mixers. I wish you could see it. I think we should put a picture of it on the website that really, and when's going to show it to them. This really, John built this. It really is going to facilitate us doing the Zoom. But it's amazing to me. We have so many talented people in this club. No, I'm not one of them, but just amazing the time and John and others that put into this. So hopefully moving forward, we'd like to have everybody here in the seat. But moving forward, if those for reasons of health or other reasons are out of town, can't be here in person, I'm hoping from here on out the Zoom will move along more smoothly. So having said that, I think we're done with the business portion of the meeting. So can I have a motion to close the business meeting? Second. All in favor of closing?
Aye.
That's the business meeting. Anybody have any new gear, license upgrades, operating experiences they want to share?
I have KO4RNT.
Go ahead, David.
I have a 6100, just brand new to me. The only problem with the 6100 is the printing is so damn small. I have to use a magnifier to read what the buttons are.
Yeah, we can relate to that.
But the screen is pretty much like a 7300. 10 watts, and I'm learning how it works.
Good. So let us know. You can make some contacts with 10 watts.
Yes, I made one with the special event station for the Indy NASCAR 200.
Cool. But yeah, that you need have a good antenna to work with 10 watts, but it can be done. All right, thank you, David. Did anyone else have go ahead, John. Well, you have to come up here. He's Englishman. They don't get just technology.
All right. 10 watts, eh? Well, with that, I can't let that pass. 8 watts. From the parking lot in Windy Hill Golf Club. 8 watts, loop antenna to Hampshire, United Kingdom, sideband, and a report of 5 before. I'll take a 5 anytime. And that, for what it's worth, was the Zigo G90 and dialed back to 8 watts. And we had a lot of fun, That's the Windy Hill gang that sometimes, of course, is well represented here.
Thank you, John. Excellent. So who needs 500 watts? Daryl. Anyway, so one of the things I like about amateur radio is I'm always learning stuff. And the other day I was admiring a 2-meter quarter wave antenna that Wayne had on his truck. He says, yeah, and it has a relatively low SWR on 440 as well. I said, what's going on there? So I did a little head scratching, and it turns out that a quarter wave antenna on 2 meters is a 3/4 wave antenna for 440. So if you have, say, 50 ohm impedance at the base of your antenna on 2 meters, then a frequency that's 3 times that will also have a similar impedance. So it's kind of related. I think it's probably related. Well, I won't get into the theory, but anyway. So the only downside to that, if it's a downside, is the radiation, the main radiation lobe of a 3/4 wave antenna is about 45 degrees. But if you're driving around an area like this where the repeaters are 600 feet in the air, I'm not sure that's a disadvantage. And if you've looked at, I've looked at dual band mobile antennas, and all of them have a choke in the middle, and some of them have loading coils, and there are a number of combinations of half wave, quarter wave, 3/8 wave, 5/8 wave, 7/8 wave. Anything that's a coil is going to be lossy. It's going to limit the bandwidth, and eventually they will fail under the conditions of being mobile, including hitting trees and so on. But Wynn also has some little whip antennas that he got from a company in Maryland, which you can tie in a knot, but you could hit those with a baseball bat. So I think if someone wants a rugged and inexpensive and durable dual band antenna, you should try a 2-meter quarter wave. So go ahead, Ken.
I have one.
Okay, come on, Ken.
Just to let everybody know, I've gotten several questions that people would like to have some help putting up antennas. Do I know of anybody? And my answer is no, but we should have somebody in the club. So if any club member would be willing to help somebody put up an antenna, let me know. You can email treasure@rarcclub.net. I'll get it and I'll make a list and we can have that available to help members, especially new members. With the tech class coming up, we might be getting quite a few people that would like to have some help. Be that, how to hang it, where to hang it, what to hang, all sorts of questions, I'm sure. So thank you.
Thank you, Ken. So it's 7:20 right now. Do we have another visitor? Young lady, are you? Oh, wow. Did you notice that I called her a young lady? And I didn't even know who it was. Anyway, it's around 7:20 right now, and Wynn's going to give us a presentation. Why don't we regroup at 7:30?
I like it. I like it.
Right, fellas. Tonight, Ken Zucker. I know your names. Tonight, we have the pleasure of having Wynn Grant talk to us. And a lot of us who live in the neighborhood with HOAs know about the hassles, and there is some legal recourse. So he's going to talk to us about HOAs and some of the legal issues with amateur radio. Wynn.
Okay, now, before I start, hold this so the guys at home. I brought a door prize. I bought this at Dayton a few years ago. This is number 8 stainless. It says stainless steel tech screws, drills through 1/4-inch steel. They're 1 1/4 inches long. They're coated with Dacromat, hardened 410 stainless. And Tom Ebert swears by these. I got him a bag of these. So who should we give them to? Does anybody have a need for it? There's 80 screws in the bag here. And I've used a few. You could just put your impact driver, a 1/4-inch driver on and drive them right through something. You don't even have to tap a hole there. Does anybody have a need for them? Sorry, the people at home, you don't qualify because shipping is not included, but yeah. Does anybody what? Oh, have a screw loose? I don't have a nut driver to tighten the screw, but I do have one. So I'm gonna throw this to Steve, and he can pass. If he wants it, he gets to keep it. If he doesn't want it, he passes it around. And at the end of the evening, somebody will just keep it. And there's your door prize for tonight. Yeah, you could give it to Ken. He'll build something with it. Okay, so let me see. I got a couple of things to show you before I start the PowerPoint here. So I'm talking about a couple of things. HOAs is probably going to take up more of our time, but before I forget, I wanted to plug a book by a guy that I know fairly well. Fred Hoppengarden is K1VR. He is a lawyer and a former ARRL director for the New England division. I think he lives in Massachusetts. And smart guy, knows a lot about, I think he has an engineering degree and a law degree. But he wrote a book some years ago that ARRL published, and this is the 3rd edition that came out about a year ago. It says Antennas and Zoning. It's got a lot of anecdotes, a lot of copies of statutes around the country. And if you're having a zoning issue to put up a tower, this is the book. Cost $40, I think, to buy it from the ARRL. But
if you want to borrow my book, you can borrow it. As you'll see, I think I'm past that point. But it's a nice book if you're interested in zoning. As I'm going to talk about tonight, a lot of the issues that we face are not zoning issues anymore. This was the problem 20 years ago, was zoning. It's moved to something else now, with we're going to talk about. But Fred's book is quite good and very helpful. And I've got some other paper up here that I refer to, but let me share our screen here and get that going so that folks at home can see the best possible image of our. Okay, there you go. I guess you're seeing that at home and we're seeing it here. I'm going to talk about antennas, HOAs, and other legal issues affecting amateur radio. It's a sad day that we have to talk about this in a hobby environment. You know, when I was growing up, I got my license at about, I think I was 13. I remember my parents had to drive me to Norfolk to the FCC office to take the test because I didn't have a driver's license, but I did get my general class license after that visit to Norfolk. But I didn't have to ever deal with legal issues, HOAs, zoning, or anybody telling me what I could or couldn't do with my radio. The FCC was the authority. If they said I could operate a radio, I could operate a radio, and I was good to go. But just with everything else in society, lawyers have inserted themselves in our daily lives in every way possible. And, you know, they want to tell us what we can do and what we can't do and what we should do and all of those things. So it's reality, but there's some issues we have to deal with. About, I think it was 7 or 8 years ago, I did a presentation for the club on a tower project that I did. I'm going to talk about that a little bit at the end, but I don't want to repeat that because I'm sure everybody remembers every slide in that presentation and every word that I said with our razor sharp memories that we all have these days. But I'm going to refer to that a little bit, but I'm going to talk about a couple of other things. And one of the first thing I'm going to talk about is, let me change this here to get this so I can, there we go. Maybe that looks a little better. This is something that we dealt with a few years ago, and I'm happy to say, why is that's not showing what's on my screen here? John, do you have an explanation for? Well, the folks at home, I'm curious as to what they're seeing. Do you see the slide that says distracted driving legislation, or do you still see the title slide?
Antennas, HOAs, and other.
All right, you're seeing the old slide. I don't. Let me see.
Yeah, what's dragging this?
This computer.
Not the five.
No, we're not using the Pi. Couldn't get it to work yesterday.
So you're gonna take that camera and aim it to the camera in between and all of this.
Yeah, but that, can you make that go away? Okay, I stopped sharing here.
There it goes.
But can you see?
It's not centered and it's not in focus.
Yeah, you're seeing it off the camera, off the monitor, which is not ideal because I've got it on the PowerPoint here, and I should be able to share it. Let me try one more time to.
Sometimes the sharing is
A little behind. All right, let me see. I don't know why I've got multiple iterations here. Maybe I was sharing the wrong screen. Let's try this one.
Yeah,
There you go. There you go.
Okay. Well, I'm glad we're finally there. Okay, perfect. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit very quickly about distracted driving legislation because we dealt with this started about 5 or 6 years ago. Virginia had a distracted driving law, which
purported to make it illegal to use any type of radio or cell phone while you were driving an automobile. And the legislature passed a law some years ago. The police went back to the legislature and said, we can't enforce this law. We need a stronger law, a better law to be able to write tickets and prosecute people who are playing with their phones and texting when they're driving. And so the General Assembly, there were a couple of bills that were introduced a few years ago. Originally, they did not have an exemption for amateur radio, and hams came to the rescue. Some of us went down and we wrote, the RARC wrote to all the people on the committees that were dealing with this legislation, told them that they needed an exemption for us because we weren't the problem. Cell phones were a different device from a microphone that you hold in your hand and push one button on. You don't have to look at your microphone. You can talk, as the police and the fire and everybody else has been doing for, 75 years, using radios in emergency vehicles. So we made the distinction that we were different from cell phones. Don't sweep us up in that legislation that applies to teenagers who are texting on their phones. I went twice to the General Assembly. The first year came up about 5 years ago. They didn't pass any bill. They couldn't agree on something, which was good because a bad bill is better than no bill, in my opinion. So the next year they came back. They had another bill, and to make a long story short, we made our case. Some of us spoke at the committee hearing, and I got the sponsor of the bill, Senator Surval from Alexandria, who was very agreeable when I spoke to him literally in the assembly room there at this hearing. And I said, you really need to exempt amateur radio. We're different. And there were some guys from Northern Virginia that were in his district, and they all came up and we huddled and we said the same thing. And in the committee room there at the hearing, he said, I moved to amend my bill. I want to add an exemption for amateur radio. Are you guys okay with that now? Will you stop opposing my bill? And we said, you're good to go. We'll sit down and shut up. And so he amended his bill. The good news is we got a good distracted driving law in Virginia that has a specific exemption that says it doesn't apply to the use of an amateur. CB got a free ride on us because they didn't lobby for anything. They weren't even there, but somebody included Citizens Band Radio, which is fine with us. We got our exemption. And I was doing an email with Fred Hoppengarden, the guy that wrote this zoning book, and a couple of other hams who are also lawyers and work with ARRL on legislation. And they're telling me stories of other states that are not giving amateur radio an exemption. They refuse to do it. They think we're, a problem, which there's no evidence of that. So just be glad you live in Virginia. But if you go outside Virginia, every state law is different. Some don't have any legislation. Some have bad legislation. I have to say, I've not heard yet of anybody being prosecuted for distracted driving in Virginia, period. I mean, and I see people using cell phones every day driving down the road. The law did not slow anybody down. They're still doing it, and they're going to keep doing it. But the hams are home free for now. So that's a good thing. We don't have to worry about, hopefully, ever again. Right. In Richmond City. Good point, Bruce. The city of Richmond passed their own legislation by a city ordinance that applies to the Richmond city limits. I think there's one in Stafford County as well, up around Fredericksburg. They did this before the state had a law because they didn't want to wait for the state, and they had their own distracted driving ordinances. It's not a statute. Statutes are state laws passed by the General Assembly. Ordinances are passed by a city council or a board of supervisors, and they apply to the locality. But Richmond City does still have one. Legislators of whatever level love to pass laws. They're not so interested in repealing laws that are unnecessary anymore. But one of these days, we're going to try to convince Richmond City, you don't need your ordinance anymore. The state has a law on distracted driving, and you should just take yours off the books. But that's going to be an uphill battle. They like to enact laws, not make them go away. All right, let me see if I can. There we go. Another existing law that's been around for a long time that a lot of people don't know about is a state law that was passed some years ago by the General Assembly that it's good for us because it limits what local governments can enact in terms of a local law regarding amateur radio antennas. This is all very good for us, and it was in response to an FCC ruling that I'm going to talk about in a minute. But essentially, we have a law in Virginia now that says a locality cannot pass a sweeping ordinance that says no antennas under 75 feet in an urban area or under 200 feet in a rural area. So, for example, if Richmond City is an urban area, they're in the higher density zone. Richmond, Henrico, Chesterfield are all in the 75-foot area. So they can pass a law that says you can't have an amateur radio antenna above 75 feet because we don't want them. They don't have to say why. They can just say we don't want them, but they can't do it for an antenna that's 74 feet. So if you're in one of those urban areas, higher density populations, you don't have to worry about a state or city or county government enacting a blanket legislation that prohibits you from having an antenna within these limits. Now, if you go to Powhatan, you can go 200 feet and Powhatan can't do anything about it. There's a lot of places where nobody cares what you put up, including the local governments. My friend AB4SF, Ray Dudley, who used to live in Richmond, moved down to Reedville, Virginia about 6 or 8 years ago and was going to put up a tower, and he called the local county building inspector and said, do I need any sort of permit from the county to put up a tower? And the guy said, I don't know. Let me see what you're talking about. I'll come out to your house next week and we'll look at your property and we'll see what you want. You can tell me what you're talking about. So he drove out to Ray's house and saw that he was at the end of a dead end road. You know, the houses were all spread out. This is, rural. I guess he's in Lancaster County, maybe, or Northumberland. But anyway, he drove out to the county. He looked around. He said, well, what were you thinking about? And Ray showed him a piece of RON 25 that was sitting on the ground and a picture of the antenna and told him he was going to put it up 75 feet or whatever. And the guy said, you're good to go. And he said, do I need to file an application to get a permit? He said, nope, go ahead. You're good. We're all set. Have a nice day. Thanks for calling. Appreciate you checking in with us, but no permits, no application, no fees. The local building inspector guy came out and said, that's all you need. Fine. Thank you for calling us. So that's where you want to live if you're going to put up a tower. I'm telling you, that's the type of locality you want to be in. So, but there is a law that does limit the amount of regulation the local government can do for ham antennas. The reason for that local law is something that the FCC enacted in 1985. It's called PRB1. PRB stands for Public Radio Bureau, which is a section of the Federal Communications Commission. And they came out with this announcement, I guess you might call it. It was a memorandum, but it was based on the concept of federal preemption. And federal preemption is where the federal government says, we're going to cover this topic and the states should stay out of it and leave it alone. This is a federal interest and we are preempting the states, and we're not going to allow state and local governments to pass laws that might conflict with federal law. For example, if you want to put up a commercial FM radio station, you go to the FCC and you apply for a license and a couple of other things. You have to get a construction permit too if you're starting a new station, but you get your license from the FCC. The state of Virginia cannot say, oh, you need a license from the state of Virginia to put up a new commercial radio station. The city of Richmond can't say you need a license from the city of Richmond to put up a commercial FM station, because the federal government has preempted radio communication and they say, we control this and everybody else, other governments, stay out of it. And that's what they did with respect to amateur radio in 1985 with this PRB1 memorandum. And it essentially said, you all can't establish restrictions that are unreasonably difficult for ham radio operators and antennas. So this previous slide that I just showed you about the state law, that was Virginia's response to PRB1. They passed the state statute and said, oh, the FCC says
we should, not make it onerous on ham operators. So this is what we've decided to do, 75 feet in densely populated areas, 200 feet in rural areas. And other than that, the state is staying the heck out of antenna regulation at the state level. So PRB has a few issues, and a lot of people, a lot of hams over the years have looked back to that 1985 doctrine and tried to say, well, I think, I can take this and tell people that I can put up anything I want to. Well, that's not what PRB 1 said. It doesn't have a height in it. Virginia enacted those 75 and 200 foot tower height limits for that the localities could not go anything less than that. But PRB 1 does not apply to homeowners associations or deed restrictions. And hams have been periodically filing petitions with the FCC saying, we want you to extend PRB 1 to homeowners associations, and you FCC tell them that they can't regulate my antenna because they won't listen to me. But if the federal government tells them that they can't regulate it, maybe that'll get me an antenna in my HOA neighborhood. And the FCC has, since 1985, every time said, we're not going there. We're not getting involved in this issue of HOA limitations. So that hasn't gone anywhere. The HOAs, the homeowners associations, are to show you how pervasive they are. Here's a few statistics that I thought were pretty compelling. We're going to talk about how they regulate antennas within HOA governed neighborhoods. But to give you an idea, in 2021, 2 years ago, 82% of all new homes that were built and sold in the United States were in an HOA community. 82% of new homes. There are 74 million people who live in an HOA or a condo governed community. 26% of the US population now lives in an HOA community. There are 370,000 HOAs in the United States. There are 2,000 amateur radio clubs in the United States, 750,000 licensed ham operators. So I did the math this morning and I said, let's divide 250,000 or 750,000 by 74 million. And the math is 0.001 when you do that division. And what you get is the analogy that here is that for every ham operator who has a license, there are 1,000 people in the United States that live in an HOA community. So if you're trying to get something passed that requires a majority vote, it ain't going to happen. The people in the HOA communities who are not ham operators and don't really care about us for the most part outnumber us 1,000 to 1, basically. So we're going to talk about how that impacts, what people who live in an HOA community can do. A lot of the things you read about this are referred to as CC&R. It stands for covenants, conditions, and restrictions. I'm just going to call them HOA restrictions. They're deed restrictions. And the reason that they are enforceable and that they are a problem for ham operators is because when you buy a property in a neighborhood or a community that has HOA restrictions recorded in the land records, those restrictions attach to the property. And when you buy a property, you are buying that with the agreement that I allow the HOA to tell me what I can do with my property. And if I don't play by the rules, they can sue me. If you bought a house in an HOA neighborhood, you signed some documents where you agreed to this. You probably didn't read them. Nobody reads that stack of paper when they hand you at a real estate closing and looks at all the things you've agreed to do. But if you have bought a home in an HOA community, you have agreed to these unless you did what I'm going to tell you to do in a minute. But 99.99% of people buy and they never read the conditions because they think, well, it doesn't bother me. And HOAs are not such a bad thing. I don't want somebody painting their house highlighter yellow in my neighborhood or putting a
a boat, parking a boat in their front yard of their house. That doesn't appeal to me. I want the boats to be parked behind the house. And HOAs have restrictions, have those types of things written into it that says you can't park your boat in the front yard. They have to be behind the house. And many HOA restrictions have specific provisions about antennas. Some of them refer to antennas directly. Some of them try to use broad language that might cover an antenna. So in a lot of these cases, if you're buying in an HOA neighborhood, you have given the HOA the authority to decide what you can put up and what you can't. And your only recourse is to ask for their permission. If it's the government has no role in this whatsoever. There's no level of government, state, federal, or local, that gets involved in the enforcement of this. It's all between you, the homeowner, and the HOA. And if the HOA says you're in violation of the restrictions that are govern this community, they can assess, usually because it's in writing, they can assess penalties against you. If you don't pay, they can sue you. If you don't pay the judgment, they will put a lien on your property so that when you go to sell your house, they'll get their money at the closing. They have a lot of tools to, punish you financially. So the homeowner really doesn't have a lot of leverage here. If your neighbors like you and you request permission to put up an antenna, they might give you permission. You never know. They did for me, as I'm going to explain. If your neighbors don't like you and you really want to put up an antenna, your recourse is find another hobby or move. It isn't going to happen. You're not going to, no matter how much money you have to spend on lawyers to think you have a way to force the HOA to approve your antenna, you're going to lose if they don't really want you to have it. The best advice I can give anybody who really wants to put up an antenna that's requires permission of the HOA is to get permission before you buy the property and make your offer on that property contingent on getting permission. I did that on the first house I ever bought 40 years ago. I was just out of law school. I wanted to put up my own tower at my house and move the antenna that was on my parents' roof over to my house now that I was going to own a house. And I didn't know when I was going to do it, but I thought I might want to do it. So it occurred to me, I wrote something in the real estate contract when we made an offer on this house that said, this sale is contingent upon permission of the Brighton Green Homeowners Association approving any and all ham radio antennas or basically anything I want to do with the property. And I didn't know if they were going to approve it or not, but it turned out that the developer in that neighborhood still owned a lot of lots that he wanted to sell, and he was going to be out of the picture one day, and he wanted to see my house get sold and the property go through, the sale go through. And in those days, nobody really cared too much about ham antennas. It just wasn't an issue. So they gave me back a letter that says, yes, you have our permission. And it was basically a get out of jail free card. If they ever came back to me and said, oh, you need our permission, I'm like, I've already got it. Can't change your mind now. So I did it on that occasion, and it worked out great. I never had a problem with that particular neighborhood and that HOA. I guess I wasn't on their radar. I'm going to talk a little bit about two other types of antennas that sometimes people say, well, why can the HOA tell me that I can't have a ham antenna, but I see all these satellite dishes on HOA homes in my neighborhood? That doesn't seem fair. Well, the reason is that some years ago, when the technology became available for direct broadcast satellites, where you could take a satellite, put it up in the air, and you could have enough power and enough signal to reach a home with a small antenna. And a couple of companies, I think Hughes, the Howard Hughes organization was one of the first to go into satellite broadcasting. They were building the satellites and they had the launch capabilities. But the satellite TV industry in those days said, before we invest all this money and launch these satellites and borrow millions of dollars to start an industry that currently doesn't exist, We want to be sure that, somebody can't go in a neighborhood by HOA or a state government or somebody and say, oh, no satellites are allowed because they look bad. We don't want those. So we want the federal government to give us essentially immunity in advance so that nobody can mess with our satellite TV business that we're about to launch. And Congress told the FCC, we like this. We want satellite direct broadcasting. It'll bring television to people that can't get cable, that don't live in a local area to get over the air TV. So we want to support this industry. It's good for the economy. It's good for the country. So they got the FCC to pass the OTARD rule, the over the air antenna receiving device rule is what OTARD stands for, the over the air television antenna receiving device rule. And that rule prohibits any restrictions that interfere with the installation, maintenance, or use of antennas used to receive video programming and certain antennas used to receive or transmit fixed wireless signals. They've since expanded it a little bit to cover internet, type data coming off of over-the-air type service. It applies to direct home satellite dishes that are less than 1 meter in diameter. Well, have you ever seen a direct TV dish or a dish network? They're the two big ones. Those little dishes are well under, 38, 39 inches. They're about 18 inches. They've gotten so small and they work pretty well. As a side note, there's no limitation on the size of satellite dishes under this rule if you live in Alaska, because for two reasons. Number one, they don't care in Alaska about how big your antenna dish is in your front yard. And they need a big dish in Alaska to be able to get a satellite signal because they're so far north and all of these satellites are parked over the equator. So you get too far north, the geostationary satellites don't work. So they were thinking about Alaska and they wrote a special provision in there, but doesn't affect us. But the rule basically says if it's for one of these purposes for television broadcasting, they can't. And this applies to HOAs as well, not just to government agencies. You can't do anything that unreasonably interferes with the installation, maintenance, or use of these antennas for this particular service. It's a pretty good tool for us. It doesn't help hams, but it explains why that rule doesn't apply to amateur radio. It's specific to video broadcasting, commercial video, and certain data signals, but it doesn't apply to ham radio. A lot of people have said, oh, well, the FCC should extend it. Well, the FCC has said, we're not going there. Congress will have to tell us to do it. They told us to do this the last time. When they tell us to pass a rule like this, we'll do it, but we're not doing it on our own. And they've rejected lots of attempts by hams to get them to extend the OTARD rule to amateur radio. And the FCC said, not going there. Something I didn't know about until recently that is analogous to the OTARD rule are solar access laws. I didn't know that they existed, but a lot of states, California, even Virginia, have in the last few years enacted solar access laws because the government says we're all supposed to go electric on everything. We're supposed to go solar. And what if you want to put up solar panels on your roof and your HOA says, no, looks bad, can't do it. The solar industry has lobbied and gotten local laws in, I think it's like 20 some states now have solar access laws, and they're coming for everywhere, where they have written a state law in most cases that say that that applies to HOAs as well. It says you cannot prevent the installation of solar installation unless you have recorded a specific declaration in the deed covenants that apply to a neighborhood that apply specifically to solar. And the good news for people in trying to come within this exception here is that when most of these deed restrictions were written, 20, 30 years ago, nobody was thinking about solar. So they didn't write it in there. And so most of them don't have it. But if they don't have it, then your HOA cannot tell you that you can't put solar up. If they do have a recorded declaration, then the HOA can establish reasonable restrictions on the size, placement, and number of solar panels
And the Virginia law on this says that the limitation that the HOA may impose is reasonable if it increases the cost by less than 5%. So let's say that you want to put a solar panel on your roof and you want to put it on the front of your house because you got the best view of the southern sky and that's where you need to mount your solar panels. And your HOA says, no, we don't like it. Put it on the back of the house. And you say, oh, that's going to cost me 20% more to put it on the back of my house, in which case you can put it on the front of your house and they can't tell you that you can't because it would increase the cost by more than 5%. Now, again, this only applies if there's no if there's no restriction on this, but a lot of these HOAs are going to be updating for future developments restrictions on solar. But right now, I think there's a little window of opportunity for people who want to put up solar now that we have solar access laws that nobody ever thought of. So here's my idea for how to take advantage of this. I tried to make this look like a single mast with a solar panel and an antenna on it. And if somebody says, you can't have that solar panel in your front yard, you can't have that ham antenna, you can say, that ham antenna, what's that doing there? I've got a solar panel and I have a solar access law in Virginia that says I can put this solar panel up because to move it anywhere else is going to cost me more than 5% and it's going to degrade the performance by 10%. Therefore, you can't tell me that I can't put my solar panel where I want to put my solar panel. Just so happens there's something on top of it, but we're talking about my solar panel HOA. We're not talking about that ham antenna. That's just a lightning arrestor for the solar panel, you know. Now, I say this tongue in cheek. I'm not recommending you try this argument. On the other hand, somebody will try it eventually because what do you got to lose, you know? So here's the idea. When you think this through, you want to put a ham antenna up, you figure out, you know, where you want to put your ham antenna and you apply to put a solar panel there. And then once you get your approval, you know, you drop the antenna on top and see how long it takes the HOA to say, you can't do that. And you can say solar access law. I'm permitted to do this. You can't tell me what I can do. I don't know. Somebody will try it. I'm not recommending it. So let me just tell you quickly where we stand on efforts to nullify these restrictive covenants, deed restrictions. What's been happening for the last 20 some plus years. In 2002. ARRL sort of embarked on a mission to try to get legislation at the federal level that would give us the right to put up ham antennas that were reasonable under the circumstances. All of these efforts at legislation by the amateur community have never said that we have the right to do anything we want to with our property and HOAs can't tell us anything about it. We can put an antenna, 200 feet tall with a strobe light in the front yard, and they can't stop us because that's the kind of law we want. We want Congress to pass a law that says that. The efforts at legislation by the ham organizations, primarily ARRL, have always said we want HOAs to be required to limit what they can do to still reasonably accommodate the amateur radio needs without a total ban on antennas. That they would like the law to be that the HOAs have no ability to deny you absolute right to put up any antenna, which is what most of them do now. I mean, most of the time, if anybody applies for an antenna in a HOA neighborhood, the knee-jerk reaction is, we don't need to see a picture. We don't need to hear what you want. We heard the word antenna, permission denied, get out of here. We don't want it. We don't have to give it to you because you already own a house here, so go away. But all of the legislative efforts have asked for a requirement that they be reasonable. Well, all of the legislative efforts have died. None of them have gone anywhere. We got the closest in 2016 with something that the ARRL was sponsoring called the Amateur Radio Parity Act. It actually, to my shock, it passed the U.S. House of Representatives. They had a majority of Congress people in the House that voted for the Amateur Radio Parity Act. But there was one senator in the Senate who I think he must have been chairman of a committee that had to take up the bill. And of course, nothing goes to a floor vote in either house unless it goes through a committee. And he was chairman of the committee. And I assume he just said, my committee's not taking this up. We're not going to vote on it, which is effectively a way to kill it. This was a senator from Florida. And he was very honest when he was asked, well, why are you not letting this go to a vote? And he said, because my constituents said they don't want it. I got a lot of HOAs in Florida and a lot of people telling me they don't want this law passed, that the HOAs have to be reasonable about anything. They wanted the control that they have traditionally had. And he killed it. Anybody want to guess who the senator from Florida was? Do you know who is the current administrator of NASA?
Oh,
That's the senator from Florida, Bill Nelson. Yeah, he was a Florida congressman, then he was a Florida senator, and he was appointed like 2 years ago to be the senator from NASA. He was also the first politician astronaut. He actually went up to on the space shuttle, I think, to the ISS for a week or something. He and somebody else. There was two civilians basically that got a ride on the space shuttle, and then now he's the director of NASA. But he doesn't. I'm not saying he didn't do what a lot of politicians would have done under the circumstances. I mean, he had a majority of people saying, kill this, use your influence, your power of seniority to stop this legislation that HOAs don't want. And I mean, Florida is just ground zero for HOAs. There's, anybody heard of the Villages, which is a retirement community in Florida? Yeah, it's huge. I have a couple of friends that live there. Some people I know from Richmond have moved down there and they absolutely love it. I think there's like 50,000 people in one of the communities that my friend lives in. And he said, oh, that's one of the smaller ones. There's others around here. I mean, they have their own police departments and they're like cities unto themselves, but it's all privately run and maintained. Yes, Bruce said they have some of the highest rates of sexually transmitted disease in these retirement neighborhoods. I will leave it at that.
Thank you.
So let's talk about quickly what the Parity Act type legislation would do if it were ever to come to be, if it were to pass. What would that do for hams? Well, there've been various bills, but they're all very similar in the way they approach it. It would not permit hams in an HO neighborhood to erect any antenna they wanted. As I said, it's not a free blank check to do whatever we want. It would require an HOA to make reasonable accommodation for some sort of effective, and that's a really important word that these laws have used, some sort of effective outdoor antenna imposing the least practical restrictions to accomplish the HOA's aesthetic purpose. Now, none of these model bills or the bills that have failed in the past have defined what's reasonable, but most of them do have that critical word in there about effective antenna, because if we ever had a law that said HOAs, you have to allow hams to, have an outdoor antenna, for example, they could say, okay, fine, you could have one, maximum height 12 inches above the roof of your house, and that's it. Nobody would ever notice that, but that wouldn't be an effective antenna for much of anything. So that's the right way to draft it, but they just haven't gone anywhere. The latest word on this is just 2 months ago, two members of Congress have introduced something called they didn't call it the Amateur Radio Parity Act this time, because they've used that term like 10 years in a row and it never got anywhere. So they changed the name pretty much the same. It says the Amateur Radio Emergency Preparedness Act. And they put a lot of preamble language in there about how amateur radio is critical to emergencies. And there's things about, natural disasters where hams have come to the rescue and they've saved the day when communications went out. And it's a really well worded act. I read the whole thing. I think I have a copy of it with me, but it's on the internet. You can read the bill. It would limit what the HOAs can do, but it would still leave some wiggle room. As it's currently drafted, it would have a complete ban on any type of antenna less than 43 feet and any type of wire antenna. So if it were to pass in its current form, it would mean that you could put up a 42-foot vertical antenna and you could put up pretty much any dipole you wanted, and the HOA couldn't do anything about it. The HOAs under the bill, if it were to pass, like I say, it's not going to pass. I'll just tell you. But the HOAs could require some sort of screening and try to limit, the visual impact. And the localities could still say, well, you got to get a building permit if it's something that would normally require a building permit. This federal law isn't meant to allow you to violate construction and safety codes. But my assessment is this law, while well-intentioned, doesn't stand any better chance of passing than similar efforts in the past. So if you're dealing with an HOA and you're trying to get approval, my question is, why did they find antennas objectionable? I've seen some beautiful structures that were radio antennas. That's the same tower there. It's a close-up shot there, but that's a radio antenna on that structure. That's in Liverpool, Joe, where we were a couple of weeks ago. And I snapped that picture because I said, I'm going to do a program in August at the club meeting, and I'm going to take a picture of a radio antenna that I think is absolutely beautiful. This is Liverpool, England, where the Beatles grew up.
Wow.
It's got radio antennas all over the top of that thing.
God, that's cool.
Now, here's my favorite radio antenna in the entire world. Everybody knows what this is. This is, in France, they
The
call it
Eiffel Tower.
La Tour Eiffel. Exactly, Patrick, the Eiffel Tower. I'm going to tell you a couple of really interesting things about the Eiffel Tower and take a travel log detour here. Built in 1889 for the World's Fair, or the Exposition Universelle, they called it. It was meant to last just 20 years. They had a permit that said you can build this tower for the World's Fair, but you got to take it down in 20 years. It's a one-shot deal. It was 984 feet originally, and it's worked its way up to 1,083 feet now. If you go to the website, the official website of the Eiffel Tower, there's a phrase that says radio saved this tower. This tower was going to be taken down, but for the fact that radio came into being, and radio was invented after the tower was erected. And I'll tell you how it came to be. It was the tallest man-made structure in the world until 1930. There was a huge amount of criticism while the tower was under construction. People said it's going to be an eyesore. It's going to look like a smokestack. They were looking at the drawings of it. And a lot of people, famous authors and artists were writing articles and editorials in newspapers saying, oh, this is a terrible thing for Paris. We don't want that ugly tower up there. But after the World's Fair, Eiffel was looking for some other uses of the tower that he might be able to, keep it up. And he was a sort of an amateur scientist, and he decided, well, I can make a meteorological station here, and I can take weather data from this and gather weather data, and that's useful for society. And then radio began to be invented. Radio has sort of taken off, and the concept was being proven in the late 1890s by people whose names we all know: Hertz, Marconi, Tesla. Wireless telegraphy was being invented around that time. On November the 5th, 1898, Eugene Ducretet established the first radio contact using Morse code between the Eiffel Tower and the Pantheon, which is a building in Paris. Get this, 4 kilometers away. 4 kilometers, that's 2 miles. He made a contact 2 miles down the road. I'm sure he could have probably thrown a rock and hit it from the top of the tower as well. But he proved the concept that we can use the tower for radio communication. After that, they installed a permanent transmitting station in the tower in 1899. They made a contact with London, England. Big improvement, over 4 kilometers. And then the French military became interested in this whole thing about radio and said, hey, that could help us. We're interested in this. So let's think twice about tearing that tower down, because their 20 years is coming up, and maybe we should see if we can use this radio stuff, and the tower would be a big help. Eiffel offered to finance the installation of a tower on the top and to run some wires. They used it to string wires down from not the very top of the tower, but from a point a couple of 100 feet up. There were like some long wire antennas to another structure in Paris, and they used those essentially dipole or end-fed antennas for some years, and they experimented with that. And then the French military began to use the tower to talk to some of their foreign legion enclaves around the world, such as in Tunisia. They had a naval base there, and they were able to communicate with that. And then in 1908, they made a contact of 6,000 kilometers away. And the military said, we're never letting go of this tower. We think radio is essential, and we've proven that it can allow us to be in contact with our troops around the world. In the First World War, it's reported that in March 1918, the French military intercepted an encrypted coded message that the Germans were sending about an invasion plan, and they claimed that this tower's strategic importance was demonstrated by thwarting a German attack, and henceforth it changed the course of World War I by the interception of the German radio signals using a tower, an antenna at the Eiffel Tower. In 1921, the first civilian transmitter broadcasting music and what they call spoken news, which was like news reports, began broadcasting from the tower, and it became a common thing in the subsequent years for the citizens of the Paris area to listen to radio that was being broadcast from the tower. In 1935, they put the first television transmitter on the tower. It had 60 lines of resolution in the black and white TV picture, 60. And then it was upgraded to 180 lines of resolution. Now, that was what they would call high def, I guess. Of course, today it's 4,000 lines of resolution for our better TV signals. In 1957, they installed some satellite dishes, and they added 3 television transmitters broadcasting the 819 line PAL standard. Anybody remember PAL was a European standard for television? The United States made a big mistake. We chose NTSC at 525 lines of resolution, and in those days, back in the from 1950s into the just a couple 20 years ago, European television signals, their analog signals worked much better than the American TV standard. In 2000, they put a new UHF antenna on top of the tower, added some height to it, and they started broadcasting digital television like the rest of the world. And there are currently 120 radio antennas on the tower. Most recent was added just last year when they added some direct broadcast audio radio transmitter antennas to the Eiffel Tower. So Eiffel Tower is here to stay. It's a magnificent structure. See, I got another picture of it here. That's kind of what the antenna farm looks like on the top of the tower with that. If you're interested, there's 20,000 light bulbs on the tower, 30,000 visitors a day visit the tower, 1,665 steps to the top of the tower. It's painted every 7 years by 50 painters. And on the second level of the tower, 379 feet, is a Michelin-starred restaurant. Anybody know the name of the Michelin-starred restaurant in the Eiffel Tower? Anybody ever heard of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea? It's called the Jules Verne. That's the name of the Michelin restaurant in the Eiffel Tower. What does that have to do with amateur radio? Nothing, but it's a beautiful tower. And whenever anybody says, you want to put up a tower? I say, yeah, look at the Eiffel Tower. What's wrong with that? I don't say mine's going to look a little different, but the concept is the same. Okay, are antennas in HOA communities possible? Yes. Sun City, Arizona is a retirement community with 10,000 homes and 75 hams, and they negotiated a deal with this corporation that runs this retirement community that you could put up a flagpole antenna as long as it wasn't taller than 16 feet and a vertical that didn't go more than 5 feet above the roof, but no towers. Not exactly a big win, but it's a good thing. Now, my quick view, I'm just going to show you some pictures here in a minute and talk about this through the HOA neighborhood that I live in. To get a tower up started when I said, gee, I've got this lot. It's got a lot of trees behind it. The house is very well screened from view by the neighbors with all these tall trees that have been here for 100 years. And I really should be able to put something back there that nobody's going to be able to see and nobody's going to be able to complain about. So I should give it a shot. All they can do is say no, because I made a big mistake when we bought this house. Joe and I fell in love with this house and we needed a house in a hurry. And I did not write in the contract that contingency that to get permission before I bought the house like I had done on my first house many years before. It was a big mistake on my part, but we bought the house and we were stuck. Whatever the conditions were that applied to the property, we were stuck with them. I met with the well, first thing was I looked at the covenants when I embarked on this quest to see if I could get permission for a tower, and I realized I didn't need their permission. They didn't write it in a broad enough fashion. They didn't have the word amateur radio antennas or any similar language. So I was pretty confident that I wasn't going to ask for permission. In fact, I called the chairman of the architectural review committee, who was a contractor and a neighbor, and I said, "This is what I want to do, Mike. This is where I want to put it. Is anybody going to have a problem with it?" And he said, "Well, if you put it right here, I think you'll be okay." And I got out a piece of PVC pipe and I nailed it in the ground so I could remember where the spot was, and I got my spot. And I then wrote a letter to the architectural review committee informing them of my plans to put up a tower as a good neighbor, not asking for permission because I didn't want to concede the point that I needed their permission, but I didn't want blowback after I had just put 6 tons of concrete in the ground and, I was stuck with it. And they sued me and said, "You got to move it." So to my shock and amazement, I got a letter back saying, your request for permission is granted for this location under the guidelines of how you described your tower. I'd given them a picture of the tower I proposed to put up and the antenna I proposed to put on it, and they gave me approval. Of course, I didn't think I needed their approval, but it was really nice to have. I had that letter. I was gold. So I hired my surveyor. We came out and we drew up a plat. I called Chesterfield County on the phone. I said, "Hey, I want to put up an amateur radio antenna. Do I need any sort of permit?" And they said, "What's an amateur radio antenna?" And I said, "Well, I'll take that to mean I don't need any permission. Thanks for talking to me. We're done here." And the guy said, "Not so fast. I want to hear more about this tower. Tell me what it looks like and how tall is it going to be and how big is the base and all this." And I answered all of his questions, and he said, "We'll call you back." And like a couple of days later, he called back and said, "Yeah, you need a building permit." I said, "Okay, that's fine." I said, "What do I need to get a building permit?" They said, "You need $100 and fill out an application and an engineering drawing to show me what it's going to look like and what the base is going to look like." And I said, "Okay, I'll come do that." So I went down, I filled out the form, I paid them the $100 and gave everything to them. And I said, "What now?" And they said, "You'll hear from us when we're ready to go to the next step." And then I get a call from somebody in another division of Chesterfield County who said, "We're looking at your application for a building permit, and there's a few other approvals that you have to get before the county will issue a building permit." I said, "Like what?" And they said, "Well, like environmental review and setback review and all of this stuff." Well, to make a long story short, the Chesterfield County people were very nice to me. And the guy looked at my plat and I showed him I had a plat my surveyor had provided, and we marked the spot where I wanted to put the antenna. And he was looking at the GIS information on the county's computer system. And he said, "Okay, well, I think the county setback requirements, provide you've got to be more than 50 feet from a back property line and more than 100 feet from a front property line." And there were all these requirements. And I said, "Buddy, I only got one spot I can fit this thing on my property, and it's marked there, and it's nowhere near anybody's house. If it falls down, it's not going to fall on anybody else's house." And he said, "Well, here's what I'm going to do. I'm looking at this plat here, and your lot isn't a perfect square. It doesn't have 4 sides on it. It's got like 8 sides because it's a kind of crazy shaped lot with a creek going through the backyard." He said, "I'm going to call this property line here the back property line instead of the sideline. And that way you've only got to be 25 feet away from that instead of 50 feet away. So I'm making this change on the plat. You'll be good to go." And anyway, I got my building permit, but I will say the county guys were very helpful on getting it done. Next step, after I had my approval, I had my building permit, was to clear some trees to make it all fit. My wife is sitting here on the front row. I never told her how much this tower cost. I'm not going to tell you how much this tower costs because she's here in the room, but it's done and I love it. But I will tell you that if you have a lot of tree work where you have to clear some trees to be able to fit your antenna and have turning radius for a HF beam, the tree work costs more than the antenna and the tower combined. The tree guys, don't go to medical school, don't go to law school, get a chainsaw and learn how to climb a tree. You'll make a lot more money. They made a lot of money on this. Next step was to pour a hole in the ground. I did a self-supporting tower. I didn't want guy wires in the back because of the visuals and the issues if something hit a guy wire and knocked the tower down. So I bought a universal aluminum tower, but it required a big hole, 6 feet deep and I think 6 feet on each side, and a lot of concrete. And I thought about, I can dig a hole and I can, get some bags of concrete. And a friend of mine said, no. You'll be digging that hole for 10 years and you'll die before you ever finish that hole. And, you need to just hire somebody that does this. And they gave me the name of a concrete contractor that puts in a lot of satellite dishes for the TV stations. And for a very reasonable amount of money, they dug the hole. They built the forms. They put rebar in here that wasn't even required. They knew what they were doing. These guys were true experts, and we got that base section put in there. And then I realized, oh gosh, I think I got my tape measure out. I went from now that we had the hole in the ground, I said, I think I'm still need a little tower work done. I got some limbs too close, so I had to call those darn tree guys back and pay them even more money to cut a couple limbs. We didn't take any more trees down, but we cut some limbs off to get everything done. So the next step, I got this antenna, and it was all bright and shiny aluminum. This is a Force 12 XR5 antenna. It's a 5-band HF Yagi, a 20-foot boom, 10 elements, and the longest element is 29 feet. Had about a 15-foot turning radius. But I saw all it laid out, and boy, that stuff was shiny and bright in the sunlight. And I said, the HOA didn't put any limitations on the tower about aesthetics, but I'm gonna head off the comments and I'm gonna paint this tower, and then began my quest to paint the antenna and the tower. 75 cans of Krylon spray paint later, I had a camouflaged tower, and it's still holding up pretty well. It's been like 12, 14 years. There it is. And that's a color picture. It doesn't have a lot of chroma in it. Oh yeah, when the tower was going up, it got up. We put 50 feet of it together on a rotating or a hinged base, and we pulled it up in the air. And the neighbor behind me came out and said, "What do you think you're doing?" And I said, "Putting up my tower." And she said, "You can't do that." And I said, "Yeah, I think I can. I got approval from the HOA and I got a building permit. I think that's all I need." And I said, "And by the way, your husband, I talked to him a year ago when I was starting this project. I showed him a picture of it. And he said, 'We have no objection. You go right ahead.'" And she looked at him, and that's when he walked back into the house with his head down like this. And he never said a word, but I knew that he was in bigger trouble than I was at that point. And anyway, I had to go back to the HOA and do a little more negotiating, even though I had every legal right to complete my project. But as a good neighbor, again, I went back and I said, okay, this is what I'm doing. And by the way, I've painted the tower and all the antennas, and that was not a condition to do it. I did it, to be a good neighbor, to minimize the visual impact. And I think I told the story before. I told the people I was meeting with, this was my one face-to-face meeting with the actual HOA, a couple of board members. I said, "I tell you what I'm going to do for you. As another act of being a good neighbor, I'm going to leave off the strobe light." And they said, "The strobe light?" I said, yeah, I was, they're on most cell towers and TV towers, it blinks pretty bright, white strobe every 5 seconds. And I said, in the nighttime, that might just bother some people. And I said, but, if you think that would be a problem, I can leave it off. And they said, "Well, if you'll do that, we're good to go here." That's great. Well, the rest of the story. It wasn't going to be a strobe light. Right. Yes. negotiation is all about making sure that somebody feels like they got something out of the negotiation, and they felt that way. So that worked out fine. But we got the tower up. Me and my friends our climbing days are over. I had to hire a tower crew out of Williamsburg that came up here, and they knew what they were doing. They brought the right gin pole, the right ropes, and the right people, and they put the tower up. And I'm happy to say it has worked amazingly well. But here are my lessons. If you want to put up a tower in the HOA neighborhood, make the purchase contingent upon approval. I did bring, if anybody wants to see it, I give you more copies of it. This is a model addendum to a real estate contract. If you're thinking about buying a house in an HOA neighborhood, you basically use this form, attach it to your contract. If you're willing to walk away from the deal, because they may say, no, we're not going to, give you the approval, but you're not stuck with owning a house and being in the neighborhood that you don't want to be in. But this is a way you can deal with it in advance if you're able to convince your wife that, sorry, honey, you're not getting the house you want because I want a tower and that's more important. Good luck with that one. If you're already in a neighborhood governed by an HOA and you don't think that they like you too much, not going to go for this tower, make friends with your neighbors. Explain. I had a lot of people ask me about the tower initially when it went up. And they said, well, so when the internet goes down, can you use that radio to talk to people? I said, oh, absolutely. Yeah. I got batteries. I got a generator. The rest of you people won't be calling anybody, sending any messages. You come see me. I'll be working. And they're like, okay, thanks. We like that. That's good. And, I explained to them, amateur radio is very resilient and we don't need the internet to make our communications. Other ways I found to make myself indispensable to my neighbors. I have a wood chipper on my tractor, and I've had neighbors who I've saw out in the yard just making this big pile of brush and working away. And I would go up to them and say, hey, would you like me to bring my wood chipper up here and clear that pile of brush for you? And they say, oh, can you do that? And I'm happy to do that. I see them out there when we've had snow in the past with a snow shovel. I said, would you like me to bring my snow blower over and clear your driveway? I painted the fence at the entrance to our neighborhood 2 years ago. So I'm a good neighbor and people like me. And I think if they went to a vote again, they would say he can have his antenna. We're not opposed to that. So kill them with kindness, I guess, is the advice. Another last resort is get you and a couple of buddies elected to the HOA board and then change those damn covenants so that you can, get your tower up. And that's another kind of, we call the brute force method of getting what you want. Get involved in politics. So the last slide here is, you may say trees are a problem. They can be, but trees in my neighborhood have provided a wonderful screen for the tower. You can't really see that antenna in my backyard. It's 70 feet up, and I said it's a 10 element HF Yagi. Got a little short 2-meter antenna on top of it. Mike Owens knows this tower very well because he and I ran the 200 feet of 3 runs of heliax from the house to the tower. That was another side pointer there. When you got to put your antenna pretty far from your house, you don't buy 300 feet of RG58 to lose all your signal. You buy the best feed line you can, and we ran 1/2-inch hard line out to the tower, and it's works very well. So that's my tower story. If you live in an HOA neighborhood, my condolences. If you think you might want to try to get permission, it might happen. It is not impossible. It is very difficult in a lot of places. So I'm going to stop here, and then I'll anybody who's hanging around want to ask any questions, I'll be glad to take them. But that's it. Thank you.
Excellent presentation.
Well
Man, thank
done.
you.
Thank you, Win.
My pleasure.
Hey, Lynn,
Yes.
how about Ryan telling that meeting is really a TV antenna?
Tell them it's a TV antenna. That thought occurred to me, Ken, but the OTARD rule is the FCC did a really good job from a legal standpoint of writing that rule. And they have some definitions of antennas in there that I think would
would not work. But I thought about that. I said, it's a TV antenna and I want to receive over the air TV from Washington DC. And this is what I need, but they do have some definitions of TV antennas, and they talk about only a TV antenna to receive the local market that you're in. So I think it would be a tough haul, but I thought about that very argument. So you're thinking like me. Okay.
I have a question, KO4RNT.
Okay.
What about something like a Comet GP1 and say you're receiving NOAA weather?
I don't think they care about NOAA weather. It's not a internet data device by the definition for the OTARD rule. They have amended that rule and included some of the like these cell companies now are selling you, cellular access to give you your home internet with no wires coming to your house. And they did amend it to include some of those data services, but I don't think that one would do it. I think it's got to be something internet related, not just a satellite reception.
Okay.
But good try.
Thank you, Wynn. Okay, so that'll conclude our meeting for tonight. Thanks, everyone.